3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
All right, welcome to Roots of Reality. I'm your host, Ben Baumann, and today I'm going to be talking about the history of controversial Supreme Court decisions. So throughout American history, the U.S. Supreme Court has always struggled at times to be on the right side of history morally. And a large part of this is due to American society having a habit of being divided over major social issues, which often kind of mark different eras in our nation's history, where one part of society wants to hold on to the past, no matter what it takes, while the younger generation wants to kind of move forward, feeling that the ideals of the past are out of touch with the morals of the next generation. So now going through some different examples of this historic divide and the major Supreme Court cases which have highlighted this divide in American history. We're going to start with 1857, when the U.S. Supreme Court would deny that enslaved people were citizens, in a case known as Dred Scott versus Sanford. Then in 1896, the Supreme Court would also uphold segregation between white and black Americans in a case known as Plessy versus Ferguson. Thus, the 1800s was marked by a Supreme Court that insisted on upholding societal racism before and after the American Civil War. Now, fast forwarding to the 21st century, we once again find ourselves faced with a Supreme Court that is once again trying to hold the nation back. But this time it's for different reasons. And a major cause of this era's issues with the U.S. Supreme Court has been because since 1970, the U.S. Supreme Court has been controlled by Republicans. And fortunately, over time, the Republican Party has moved away from being the historic party of Lincoln that was fighting for the rights of people, and has instead, especially in the 21st century, become a much more and more conservative political party, to the point where now the party is led by a wannabe authoritarian, Donald Trump. And to highlight this decline of the Republican Party, all we have to do is just look at Supreme Court decisions that have been made within the last couple of decades. For instance, in 2010, the Republican-controlled Supreme Court would overturn previous restrictions on corporate campaign spending, thus allowing corporations to spend unlimited amounts of money on their preferred politicians, who can then potentially vote on legislation that will allow for companies to make even more money. This case was known as Citizens United versus FEC. Additionally, in 2022, the Republican-controlled Supreme Court would strike a major blow to women's rights based on the religious beliefs of the Republican Supreme Court justices, who would then decide to overturn Roe v. Wade, ending national protection for women's abortion rights across the country, and instead leaving it up to individual states to decide if a woman should be allowed to have an abortion or not. And because of this, now we are left with several states across the country, especially in the South, who have now implemented draconian abortion bans that don't even allow exceptions for women when they are raped, making it so that now there are American states across the country that have the strictest anti-abortion laws out of all modern developed nations in the world today. And this case was known as Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization. And finally, and perhaps even the worst, this year in 2024, the Republican-controlled U.S. Supreme Court would essentially create a new imaginary constitutional amendment claiming that presidents are allowed to commit whatever crime they want as long as it's for official acts, whatever that means. In this case was known as Trump versus United States. And the tragic irony of this absurd ruling is that 3 of the U.S. Supreme Court justices that ruled in favor of former President Donald Trump were also appointed by him, thus essentially allowing Trump to at least claim that he is immune from any criminal prosecution and that no matter what crime he commits, As long as he deems it as an official act, then technically he can get away with basically anything. Now, whether the Supreme Court will actually rule that way is to be determined, but certainly it is not a good look when 3 of the United States Supreme Court justices essentially owe their careers to the person that they're supposed to be ruling on, which, of course, is a conflict of interest. So there we have it, a U.S. Supreme Court that has really started to tarnish its reputation in the modern era as a branch of government that cannot be trusted to be nonpartisan anymore, but will instead go down in history as causing great damage to the American political system and society. And this is why that the current Supreme Court has an approval rating of below 40%. But ultimately, what this really highlights, if we really want to get down to the very true meaning behind this Supreme Court, is that elections matter. If you really want to change the United States Supreme Court, don't elect people that will put judges on the Supreme Court who will make the Supreme Court worse. Because at the end of the day, as history reminds us over and over and over again, the person that you elect as president will have major effects on your future. So if you're concerned with any of the Supreme Court cases that have been ruled in recent years, then you should probably look at the source. And the source is the Republican Party today. So with that, as always, remember, billions of years led to you, so make the most of it.